So I look at society as tips and roots, and I always am wondering how can we connect tips and roots. So it's it's cross sector, but it's also so roots would be those of us that are working every day at our less glamorous jobs and taking home somewhat less glamorous or a lot less glamorous paycheck and so forth, and maybe not in academia, not in politics, but we still have something to offer. How does the rest of us get engaged in that system that you're proposing?
Well, we have webinars for one thing, which are wonderful. We have two kinds of webinars. One are webinars for caring economy leaders. And they are very affordable, and we do give scholarships for people who can't even afford that. And basically, it's not only the data, but it's a whole new way,
Right.
which provides answers and
Right.
solutions. The other thing is we have cultural transformation webinars, which really sort of connect a lot of the dots and make it possible for progressives, because it isn't just regressives.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Regressives get it. For them, it's always a top priority. Whether it was Hitler in Germany, Stalin in the Soviet Union, Khomeini in Iran, fundamentalists, so-called religious fundamentalists, always a top priority to get women back into their quote traditional or subservient place in their quote traditional family, which is a code word for a rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family where kids learn it's very painful to question orders, no matter how unjust or irrational. If we don't address these fundamental issues, which they do, we're not going to move forward. So progressives, we really need to educate ourselves as progressives to no longer marginalize these so-called women's and so-called children's issues. They are the foundations, and without them, domination systems will keep rebuilding themselves, whether they're religious, whether they're secular, whether they're Eastern, whether they're Western. That's why this whole new lexicon, this whole new language, and this whole new conceptual framework is so powerful.
And I think that we're seeing evidence that this framework is starting to be instilled in social norms, in fact. And the most sort of amazing transformation I saw this fall was around the NFL's issues with domestic violence or gender violence and interpersonal violence. I have to say, having been quote unquote having experienced gender violence, I was thrilled that the NFL was where this happened because I knew that they had a powerful voice and it gave us something concrete to deal with. What blew my mind was how citizens drove with their anger at how the NFL was handling the problem. They drove the sponsors, the economic component, to make choices that made the NFL wake up to a certain extent. What I'm thrilled further with seeing is the idea that women and men are working together. Finally,
Absolutely.
This was a transformation.
That's the partnership model, isn't it? I'm always so delighted when I get a lot of mail, and people after I speak, because I keynote a lot of conferences, come up to me and say that my books have transformed their lives. But I'm the most thrilled when men come up to me, or women come up and say, "My father gave me this book." Or my brother gave me your book and it changed my life. This is why we have to change the language to talk about the partnership rather than domination system. That's the basics. And I want to talk for a moment about what you mentioned, which is violence against women and children. These are old, entrenched traditions of domination. These are not accidental.
And they're not. And we have, going back to your years when you were really focused on the law, we have laws against in this country, certainly, and most Western countries. We have very decent laws. The problem is they don't work. So this is a social issue. Am I right?
We're back to the cultural transformation, but I do want to say something because we're in Minnesota. The Duluth program.
Yes.
I'm co-chair. I belong to a lot of international organizations. One of them is the World Future Council, and I'm the co-chair of their commission to stop violence against girls and women. And we just had a meeting with the European Parliament and with other organizations. And the Duluth program got the first prize as an example. Their community, their coordinated community response program, as an example of a policy that works. But we have to do more than that, because the problem is that people must be held accountable. And in so many world regions, I mean, I work with women from all over the world. One of my colleagues is a woman in Kenya working against, in fact, she's one of on the board of the a new journal of interdisciplinary journal of partnership studies, Kirumbu Abuya. She's working, she was genitally mutilated, and she is now working against it. This is what has to happen, because look, if children see the use of violence in their families, they learn a very important lesson, which is that it's okay, even quote moral, to use violence to impose your will on others. So again, we're back to connecting the dots. And I want to really speak to progressives about this, because the tendency for many, many people who consider themselves progressives is still to marginalize these issues and say, oh, well, first we have to work on the important things. Well, that's nonsense. These are the important things.
Right. These are at the core of the important things.
These are
If preventing violence and keeping families and children healthy isn't core, I don't know what it could be.
Well, it's no coincidental matter that those societies where violence against women and children is still traditionally and religiously very often condoned are also, if you look around the world, societies that are more warlike, where cruelty is more acceptable, and that are much more unequal and authoritarian. I mean, I'm thinking about the failure, and it was a failure of the Arab Spring. Why? Because the foundations weren't addressed. So who did they elect? They elected the Muslim Brotherhood, yet another authoritarian regime. And so if we don't address the foundations, and that's what this work is about, and it's very exciting, and I want to invite all of our listeners to really integrate this into your work. Come to our launching of the social wealth economic indicators, because these are, I mean, they are what's been missing. Even the new alternatives to GDP do not take into account the economic value of this so-called women's work. And you know, women and children are the mass of the world's poor and the poorest of the poor, because that work is so poorly paid in the market, and in most world regions doesn't have policy support.
And your nonprofits and NGOs are funding microgrants for women because there's a belief that women are more responsible sometimes.
And yet, at the same time, these microgrants don't go very far. Right. I mean, I hate to say.
No, you're preaching to the choir. We're trying to raise money.
Yeah.
And what we're finding is, you can get small money, but to really build change, you need meaningful income. And a small microgrant can only change so much.
What you need is a lot of perseverance, a lot of determination, courage. I recently got a Pioneer Award, and I said, yeah, it's exciting to be a pioneer, and I'm glad you're honoring me, but know that it's also frustrating to be ahead of your time.
Yes.
Well, what I'm seeing now is that time seems to be catching up a little.
Good.
Well, the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership
Absolutely.
Studies,
Yes.
Very much to my colleague, Teddy Potter.
This was somewhat unheard of not long ago, too,
Well,
especially in academia and all
the social wealth economic indicators.
Absolutely.
The fact that I get invited to speak at the United Nations General Assembly, usually the only woman in that particular conversation, and the only one who'll talk about, I was on a panel on the environment, and it was really a joke. And they were very nice, wonderful people, some of whom I know and adore. Were doing fabulous work, but not one of them spoke about poverty. Not one of them spoke about women or children. It was like, what planet are we living?
A sense of denial of if we don't talk about it, we
But
don't have
these
to
were
deal
all
with it.
progressives. No, it's not a sense of denial. It's that their paradigm is still
Is to fit into the old model.
It's still the old model.
And this is the truth. And so that, and it's not, and women in fact have also struggled with this paradigm of trying to be like the male model, which I personally reject, you know.
Well, let's not call it the male model. Let's call it the
that's
domination
right.
model.
Thank you.
Because women can be just
Absolutely.
you know,
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Sarah Palin.
Yeah, I mean, you're right.
etc.
And it's not fair to.
Yeah. But women as a bloc. Now, this is something the countries that have moved most to the partnership side of the continuum, which are Nordic nations like Sweden, Finland, and Norway, have caring policies, but they have 40% of their national legislature is female. They vote for caring policies, but not only that. As the status of women rises, men no longer find it such a difficult thing to embrace these more soft priorities. And we see that in the men who are doing fathering today. Only, you know, the way that it
there's a sense of liberation in these men, right? And it's just delightful. And they are, you can tell it, it's like, you know.
So I want to invite our viewers, our listeners, use your organizations to really spread this.
Absolutely.
Because without a new paradigm, a really new paradigm, and a new vocabulary, and new tools like the webinars we have, and the new economic, social wealth economic indicators we have, we are going to stay on the margins.
And what WetheP does, we will definitely be sharing this with all of our audience, but we will do what we can as well with technology. We provide tools that allow groups to come together and to connect with one another across disciplines. So we'll do our little part to support the amazing work that you've led, and we're really grateful that you took your time to meet with us and share all of this exciting stuff. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.